This boy would rather fight than talk. He was rich but selfish and kept all of his money to himself. He was inside of a great golden castle, in the middle of the tall mountains, and all the while he would count his money, and as he walked, he could hear the chink of the coins in his pockets, and he would think only about money. He would walk slowly. He would smile to himself to think of how well he lived, all of the things that money had brought for him. But he liked to know exactly how much money he had. So he would count it, and he would stack it by the side of the doors and the windows, stack it in every room. He would make sure that he knew right down to the very last coin, every last round golden coin, just how much money he had. And on this rainy winter's morning, he looked out of the window, and there he could see his horse. The horse's bridle was made of woven silver and silk. It had studded diamonds all about its bridle and bit. For the only friends that he had were the horse and the dog and the cat. Now the dog and the cat lived better than many of his slaves, but as he was counting all of his money, he watched the dog and the cat run out of the room, and he could hear someone else counting. Oh, he was rich, and he had many slaves, but he wondered who it was who could be counting. But it wasn't the round and cheerful clink of gold, it was the dull ring of copper coins. He would hardly have ever bothered to use them, but now he was curious and he wanted to find out who was counting. And in one of the darkest of rooms, he saw a boy, a slave counting out his own coins into a wooden box, a rough wooden box. The rich boy looked at him and said, "What are you doing, counting? I am the only one who can count money in this place, and the money belongs to me, so give it to me now." "But master, I have so little," said the slave. "I have so little, please do not take." "You will give me everything that you have, including the box." The slave knew that there was no way that he could not hand over the box and his few copper coins to his master. But the only thing that the boy had, the slave boy, the only thing that he truly had was the fact that he was imprisoned as a slave. And as he handed over that box with the few coins that it had inside of it, the rich boy took it and held it close to his hands, and he wrapped his arms about it. "Good, these coins shall be mine as well." But in handing over the box, and having asked for what it was that the slave boy had, and the only thing that he had was his imprisonment, the rich boy stood there and couldn't believe it, because when he looked down towards his feet, the golden floors in this golden castle had formed themselves as chains about his feet, and were starting to drag him inside of the gold that made the very fabric of this castle. All around him, he could see that the doors were closing. He had looked out and he had seen the rain falling. But now he was trapped inside of this castle with piles of gold either side of him. And he was richer than anyone else. But he was a prisoner, imprisoned inside of a golden castle, with nothing to eat and nothing to drink, but only his gold for company. She pulled her fingers through her long curly hair, and she was no stranger to hunger. She stood by the side of this long river, and she wondered on this winter's morning when she would ever eat again. She rippled her thin fingers into the cold waters of the river, but she saw something. It wasn't a fish, and she reached out towards it. She found that it was a bundle. Now, there was a great curiosity inside of her heart, and she decided that she would find out what it was, and she forgot all about the iciness of the water as it stiffened her fingers, because she wanted to open the packet and find out what was inside. And with her white porcelain fingers, she tore the package open and found that inside, wrapped against the water and the cold, there was a bundle of sweets. I've told you already that she was hungry. She couldn't believe it. The air was filled with the sweet fragrance of summer, honey, sugar. She didn't even wait for the time that it would take to make a single sigh, to try and wonder or worry about who these sweets belonged to. She had hunger as a friend, and she knew what it was to have no money in her pocket. She was not going to share these with anyone. These were longed-for sweets that would be as sweet as honey upon her tongue. As she opened up the bundle more, the water dropped down onto the river, and she could see a silvery reflection of an old woman. She startled, she looked. She could see that the old woman had silver earrings at her ear, and at her neck there was silver. Her fingers dripped almost as the water that dripped from the bundle. They dripped with silver. Well, my dear, do you like the sweets? I don't mind that you never even thought about sharing them with anyone. It was almost as if the old woman could see inside of what the younger woman was thinking. I don't mind that you didn't want to share them. Would you like to taste them? There was something about the way that the old woman seemed to be insisting that she ate them that made her frightened. She spoke. They won't harm me, will they? No, my dear. They will not harm you. They'll make you feel as if you could live forever. In the time that it had taken for the old woman and the woman with her long curly hair to talk, some writing had appeared on the sweets. It was writing that the younger woman did not understand. And now, as she sniffed those sweets and could feel the sweetness filling the air and her head, she could barely resist the chance to lay it upon her tongue and to taste the sweet. It will not harm me. No, my dear. Oh, I make my sweets. They are special. They will make you special. The woman found it too hard to resist the temptation of tasting the sweets, the longed-for sweets, the honey, sickly sweets. She bit into it, and she could feel it, grainy and strong upon her tongue. It made her feel quite giddy as she bit into the sweet again. It will not harm. But now she couldn't speak. She reached her arm towards the old woman. Her arm stretched out towards the river, and her other arm was caught. And as the woman looked, she could see her thumb become sweet as a flower, as a rose, and each of her fingers turned one by one, and her arms became stiffer, and she watched as she was there, rooted to the spot like a mandrake by the side of the river, that people would come and gasp in wonder to see such a beautiful plant, covered with flowers, whether the sun shone, or the winter's snow would fall, or the spring winds would blow, or the autumn leaves would fall. For it always remained in flower, and always lay there by the side of the river, rooted to the spot, and a shape that was like a woman, reaching out, but regretting that she'd ever sculled her fingers into the water to pick up a bundle that she would not share. The old warrior had travelled far to come to this town. It was not the biggest town that he'd ever been to, but he could feel the sword in his hand and the club by his side, and he was weary and tired. tired of fighting and tired of travelling, and now he just wished for some rest. Now, he was strong in his arm, and he had fought in many great battles. But when the king had found that there was peace, he did not need to have so many warriors. And all of the warriors had been sent to go back to their homes. But it had been such a long time since he had been in his home, he'd forgotten where it was. Now, at the edge of this small town, busy with all of its stalls and traders, he could hear the people mutter and mumble that the gods, especially the god of the sun, was angry with them, for the crops would not grow, and the sun would beat down, and the rain would not fall. And here he stood, and all around him he could see the food that people had caught. The food was there, the meat was ready to be cooked, and he could not remember when it had been since he had last eaten good, fresh meat. Every town, every city, every place had a place where there would be sacrifices to the gods, so that they would be happy and the rain would fall. And the old warrior looked, and the greatest of people who lived inside of those villages was the priest. The priest with their great cloaks upon their backs. And now a priest pushed past the old warrior, and that priest had at his belt a knife, a flint knife, that he would use to spill blood so that the gods would be pleased. And the priest stopped and looked and said, "You, sir, what is it that brings you to our town?" The old warrior looked. "I have travelled far, by the banks of the rivers, far across the seas, and now I wish to find some rest and do some good." The priest looked at him. "Do some good? Do some good in this place? There is no more need for you with the strength in your arm and the sword in your hand. If you would wish to do some good, then perhaps you could volunteer to be sacrificed to the gods." It's a strange thing. The old warrior didn't hesitate. Yes, if that would do some good to this place and make the crops grow and appease the sun god, then yes. That night, the warrior was treated to the finest of foods. He was given the finest of wines. But the next morning, when the sun arose, he lay down flat upon the stone slab at the top of the great temple in the middle of this town. He lay there. He was weary, he was tired, and he could see, as the light from the sun was starting to go across, he could see that priest raise the stone knife high in the air, and no sooner had he raised it high in the air to bring it down to end his life than he heard a pit-pat, 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 pit. The rain had started to fall. Everyone who had stood there ready to watch ran back to their crops, for if the rain was to fall and the sun was to shine, then all of the crops would grow well and strong and hard, and they would not need a sacrifice. The priest looked at the old warrior. "Perhaps one day, someday, I may call upon you again. But until that day, you are free to go." The old warrior walked through the middle of the town. Everyone would pat him upon his back for being so brave and so strong, to volunteer himself for the good of everyone else. And the priest would walk through the town, and perhaps the two of them would brush against one another. But the old warrior would look and say, "One day, maybe someday soon."